One of the major socio-emotional tasks of adolescence is identity development. So it's important that you do the activity before moving on with the lecture. So when you think of descriptors of yourself or adjectives that define you, come up with a list of 20. So what you can see here is that adolescence is really a time of trying on many possible selves. You're figuring out who you are with respect to things like vocation or career. Look at your list. Did you have anything on that list that pertains to vocation or career? What about religious beliefs? What about relationships? Like, are you single? Are you married? What about motivation or intellectualism? Are you driven? What about sexual identity? Cultural or ethnic identity? Hobbies or sports, ways that you like to spend recreational time? Did you have anything on your list about your personality, that you're introverted or extroverted, anxious or calm, friendly or hostile? Body image, that might be a part of your identity that you put on your list. The idea behind identity development in adolescence is that there are a lot of components to figure out. And so the process of identity development can be long and drawn out. We see that it's replete with negations and affirmations of various roles or faces. It tends to happen bit by bit in this kind of a piecemeal fashion type of way. So it's also fluid. It's not set in stone. Once you think you have your identity figured out, it continues. It's recurring, it's recursive. But in the end, the process, it's not really neat, but it's also not really cataclysmic. So Erikson talked about identity achievement versus role confusion as being the primary developmental task of this phase of life. Now, he felt that adolescence was a special time of psychosocial moratorium, or really a time in life where society makes relatively few demands on us. It's as though there's this recognition that adolescence is a time of transition, or this gap between the security of childhood and the autonomy of adulthood. So there are really relatively few demands placed on these emerging adults, leaving them free to try out different possibilities or different identities. So current theorists agree that questioning of values and priorities is necessary for a mature identity, but they see this process not really as a crisis, but more of just this process of exploration followed by commitment. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. So we've already talked a little bit about what identity is. Someone who has achieved identity basically knows who they are, what they value, they know their direction in life. But someone with identity confusion lacks a definition of self or an understanding of the direction of their life. They do less exploring in adolescence. Now, the reason for this could be because earlier psychosocial conflicts were not resolved well, like autonomy versus shame and doubt, industry versus inferiority. Or maybe they don't feel, really by virtue of social circumstance, like they have many choices open to them. So they think there's no need to try on other possible selves. You know, for example, maybe their parents own a business and it's always been the idea really from day one that they would eventually also take on that family business. So these individuals tend to be less prepared for the tasks of adulthood because they lack a clear sense of who they are or where they're going. So identity development is very complex. The adolescent has to figure out which traits describe him or her, and then they have to unify them into some larger abstract tapestry of self-understanding. So they have to understand not only what they are like most of the time, but also the situations where they don't seem to act according to their own identities. And eventually, they work out an organized system of self-understanding or self-concept, as your book discusses, complete with qualifiers and integrating principles. So when it comes to identity development, I'd like you guys to keep in mind stereotype threat. So this is actually a really good example of those qualifiers or integrating principles. So, maybe most of the time you're a really good math student, but when faced with some type of stereotype threat, like women are terrible at math, which is a stereotype, you don't perform as well when you're doing math problems. So that would be an example. So I'd like you guys to keep that in mind. Okay, so we talked about this balance really between exploration and commitment when it comes to identity. So Marcia talks about 4 identity statuses that differ in their combination of exploration and commitment as described by Erikson. So someone who is identity achieved right here, they're committed to values, beliefs, and goals, but it's followed a period of exploration. So they have this sense of psychological well-being, of continuity, a sense of direction and purpose. So they've thought very long and hard about their decision. Someone in identity moratorium right here would be exploring. So they're high on exploration, but they just haven't yet committed. So it's kind of like moratorium is a holding pattern where you haven't yet made any definite commitments. So you're in the process of exploring. It still has a purpose. You're trying to figure out your values and your goals. You just haven't yet committed. Identity foreclosure would be like you're highly committed, but you haven't done a lot of exploring. So it's commitment in the absence of exploration. It's commitment without question. So here you might tend to accept a ready-made identity that's been passed down to you by authority figures like your parents, your teachers, religious leaders. An example of this would be like if you asked someone, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And they said, well, my family's always been Democrat, so I'm also Democrat. There hasn't been any exploration done. You've just taken on this identity that's been given to you. And then identity diffusion would be someone who's just kind of apathetic. They lack both exploration and commitment. There's not a clear direction. There's no commitment to goals. You're not even trying to reach any goals. You may never have explored, or maybe you just feel really overwhelmed when you do try to explore. So you just are kind of like, I don't know. I don't have any leanings one way or the other. I'll just roll with it. So what we see is that some young people remain in one status, whereas others experience many status transitions. For the most part, young people move from lower statuses to higher ones between their mid-teens and mid-20s. But as many remain stable, some might even move in reverse direction. So attending college promotes identity development because it provides students with all of these opportunities to explore career options, to explore different lifestyles. So it really allows for this moratorium eventually allowing that person to commit and reach identity achievement. So this is just a really helpful summary of Marcia's 4 identity statuses. So you guys can take a look at this, put it on pause if you want to read more about them. But it's nice because they also give you examples of the different statuses. So for now, I'd like you guys, we're just going to play this little fun game. So I'll give you a scenario and try to see if you can identify which status illustrates that individual. So here's the first one. Jacob's father, grandfather, and 2 of his uncles are all police officers. Since he was in middle school, Jacob has planned to become a police officer too. During his first semester of college, Jacob declared criminal justice as his major. So here the answer is identity foreclosure. Let's do the next one. Janissa spent her senior year of high school exploring career options within the field of education. She attended career fairs and shadowed a social worker, school principal, special ed teacher, and a speech and language pathologist. During her second year in college, Janissa declared her major in special ed. So correct answer here is identity achievement. Yuri is about to finish high school. Although she plans to attend college, Yuri has not decided what she wants to do with her life. She has considered medicine, law, and social work. Yuri has volunteered at a nursing home and currently works part-time as a secretary for a small law firm. Yuri plans to spend her first year or two of college exploring her options before settling in on a major. So the answer here is identity moratorium. And then here's the last one. Ashton is a junior in high school and seems uninterested in college or trade school. He has worked several part-time jobs but quit each within a few weeks. When asked what he wants to do with his life, Ashton usually says, "It really doesn't matter to me what I do. I'm not in a hurry to go to college or start a career. There's plenty of time for that later." So the correct answer here is identity diffusion. Okay, so one thing that we mentioned is that identity development is fluid. It's really not set in stone, so it continues throughout the lifespan. So some factors that can affect identity development include personality, parenting, peers and friends, and schools. When it comes to personality, adolescents who assume that absolute truth is always attainable often see things very black and white, and they tend to be more foreclosed. Those who doubt that they'll ever feel certain about anything are more often identity diffused. And those who appreciate that they can use rational criteria to choose among alternatives are likely to be exploring an identity achieved. When it comes to parenting, adolescents who feel attached to their parents but also free to voice their own opinions, so they have a secure attachment, are typically moratorium or achieved. Foreclosed teenagers usually have a close bond with their parents, but they might lack opportunities for a healthy separation. And then diffused young people report the lowest levels of parental support and of warm, open communication. Interaction with diverse peers really does encourage adolescents to explore values and possible roles. So peers and friends can be helpful here. And then schools and communities can also help by offering varied opportunities for exploration, having classrooms that promote high-level thinking and teachers who encourage all students to go to college. That can also be really helpful. But identity development is truly a lifelong process, even though it has its most profound expression in adolescence. If we think about it as a lifelong process, what we see from the very beginning, we see this appearance of attachment. And then the individual develops the basic sense of self in infancy, and then basic independence in early childhood. They can feed and dress themselves. They gradually become better at those behaviors during middle childhood. And then gradually during adolescence, they start taking over responsibility for those behaviors, providing their own clothes or food or shelter, then in early adulthood. And then enjoying the fruits of their labors and starting to give back to the next generation in middle adulthood. And then by later life, doing life review and integration, right? So many well-developing people will actually move back and forth between aspects of identity development across the lifespan. So many developmentalists believe that the most successful and fulfilled individuals move after adolescence between a MAMA pattern. So moratorium achievement. So the idea is you're searching and then you commit. You're searching and then you commit. So this way, identity is fluid. We continue to grow. Even when we feel comfortable in our own skin, we continue to grow. Okay?